Welcome to the What to Read Next podcast. In this podcast, your host, Lori Amin, will interview published authors to chat about their work, journey to getting published, and their book recommendations. If you share a passion for books and always looking for your next read, then join us. Hi, Adele. Welcome to What to Read Next podcast.
Hi, thanks so much.
So happy to have you here. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, my name is Adele Myers. I'm the author of The Tobacco Wives, which is my debut novel that's coming out March 1st. I grew up in North Carolina and have a journalism degree from UNC at Chapel Hill. And I moved to New York right after graduating from journalism school, and 20 plus years, I'm still here. I live in Brooklyn with my husband, my son, and our dog Chipper. Mm-hmm. And I think you had asked for a fun fact, or said that you might want to know a fun fact. And I have one to share, which is that I am a power lifter. And I took up the sport at the same time that I committed to writing this novel. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Yeah, so.
That's amazing. And so how much can you lift, I guess, is the question.
Well, there are 3 lifts. So it's squat, deadlift, and bench press. Okay. So the most I've ever deadlifted is 235 pounds. Wow. So that's like lifting off the ground. And if you could see me, I'm not like a big muscly, person. You would never guess that I'm a power lifter, but I just fell in love with the sport and the structure of it. And I actually think it gave me a lot of a new level of discipline. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think it's kind of not a coincidence that once I took this up, some of that training mentality translated to my writing as well, and just kind of showing up each day.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think sometimes it's about doing the training, the marathon, as opposed to doing like spurts, like sprints. It's like you gotta take care of building that habit.
Right, exactly.
Getting the time to do it. So that's amazing. Oh, such a good fun fact. So all right. So let's talk about Tobacco Wives. What is the elevator pitch?
Okay, so The Tobacco Wives is the story of a young seamstress in 1946 North Carolina in a tobacco town. And basically, she inadvertently discovers some truths and lies about the big tobacco empire in this town. So the story's told through the eyes of this seamstress. Her name's Maddie Sykes. She's 16 years old, and she's just lost her father in World War II. And her mother drops her off with her aunt, who's a seamstress, in this town. It's the fictional town of Brightleaf, North Carolina, which is, I would say loosely based, but it's really based on Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is where I spent a lot of time growing up.
I love this. And so what was the research process, or what was the process of, getting the setting done? You mentioned you had spent a lot of times growing up there. Was there any other things you looked for to get the setting and the actual life in 1946?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there was a lot of research involved. I mean, I think what kind of inspired the book was the fact that, both sets of my grandparents are from Winston-Salem. My parents met at R.J. Reynolds High School. One of my grandmothers was a hairdresser for the wives of the R.J. Reynolds tobacco executives in the 1940s. And so she would tell me stories about these women, and that was kind of the seed of the idea. I was just fascinated with the idea of, these women when I was a young girl, like that they were beautiful and wealthy and glamorous, and they seemed to have it all. And then as I got older, I realized that they really had very little power, even though they were wealthy, as many women in the 1940s South did. And so I did a lot of research. There was one book in particular called The Southern Lady from Pedestal to Politics. And it was really interesting. It talked about how women used social gatherings like, church groups and afternoon teas and all these different events to begin to organize and that in many ways during that period in the 1940s was kind of the precursor to the modern women's rights movement.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I also, like my father, when he was a teenager, he worked in some of the cigarette factories.
Yeah.
And so I talked to him, and it was interesting. Like I talked to a lot of family members, and some of the stories that came out were really interesting and ended up in the book. Some of the little details, which, I find fascinating when I read historical fiction. I want to learn something about a world that I
Mhm.
don't know anything about. And so my grandfather, who worked in the factory, actually talked about this practice that they had in the cigarette factories of making what's called recon cigarettes. That stands for
Mhm.
reconstituted. So basically, they would sweep up the sweepings from the floor, like bits of tobacco, dust,
Yeah.
whatever had fallen to the ground, and they would cook it up and repackage it into the off-brand cigarettes.
Oh,
So I was like, ew, that is disgusting.
it really is. It's like you just like, I don't know, there's bugs, rats, stuff in the floor.
Yeah, yeah. And there was like a separate factory to do that, and it was guarded. It was under lock and key. Only certain people could go there. So there were these secrets. And so
Mhm.
my protagonist, this young woman who's a seamstress, begins to see that all this glamour, of smoking and these like wealthy women, she's also exposed to the factory, and she begins to learn some of these things. And so, the novel takes place over the course of one summer, and her eyes are really opened to the realities of this town, but also to the roles of women
Mhm.
during this time.
I love this. And so you're a debut author, so I'm curious to hear what was your publication journey for you? Um,
It was a very long one.
yeah.
It was a very long one. I've always written, I've worked in advertising and PR for 20 plus years. And so I have always written as part of my day job. But I started out with writing short stories. And actually the seed of the idea for the Tobacco Wives was, part of a short story like
Mhm.
20 years ago. And I remember my writing teacher at the time, I was taking classes at night. She said, I really feel like there's a novel here. And that like planted this little seed with me. And I knew I always wanted to write a novel.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I mentioned when I took up this sport of powerlifting, that was about 8 years ago. And
Mhm.
I made a commitment at that point. I was like, I'm going to do this. And so I worked on a first draft for, a couple of years actually. And I was part of different writing groups. I took classes. And I feel like it was kind of this trail of little bits of encouragement, feedback, confidence that I got, from other authors, from teachers along the way to say, we really think you can get this published.
Yeah.
And so, I got the book to a place where I was happy with it, and I started pitching agents. I pitched for about a year and a half
Okay.
before I, got my agent.
Mhm.
And then I worked with her for about another year to
Mm.
make some pretty significant changes, including aging up my protagonist, because in the original manuscript she was younger. She was like 12 years old.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. That's a big change.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a big change. Like, it really required pretty much a whole rewrite
Yeah.
because she's looking at everything through, older eyes.
Yeah.
um, yeah. So, and then I finished the revisions, and we felt like the book was in a really good place. And it was March 2020, and
Mhm.
the pandemic hit. So I thought, oh my gosh, I've lost my window to get this published. I mean, the world was just such a strange place at that
Yeah.
time. Um, so we held off until the fall, and then my agent approached publishers, and my editor, Liz Stein at William Morrow, ultimately, I had a few offers, but ultimately went with her.
Oh, congratulations. I love this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I love the fact that it's like sometimes we think it's an overnight success, but it's a long-winded road where it takes you to different places where you have to do so many different things until you get the book out there. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, even the stories where I hear people who, you know, get
mm,
an agent and sell quickly and don't have to make a lot of revisions, there's
yeah,
still, you spend so much of your life reading,
mm,
writing,
yeah,
developing as a person, I think,
yeah,
before you're able to get a book out there.
yeah, so true. Oh, I love this. So what has sparked joy over the past couple of years?
What has sparked joy,
Mhm. Yeah.
as far as books? Um, books, sure. Um, I recently read The Plot, which,
Mm,
is, I mean, it's interesting. I read a lot of historical fiction and I'm a big
yeah.
fan of historical fiction because that's what I write. But I also enjoy a wide range of books.
Mhm.
Literary fiction, thrillers. I also really enjoy nonfiction
Yeah.
that teaches me about a world I don't know about. But I
Mhm.
found The Plot really interesting. I don't know if you've read it, but
No, it's on my list. So tell me
uh,
about
yeah, I
it.
mean, I mean, basically, in a nutshell, it's this like once promising young novelist
Mhm.
who is now teaching, and he's kind of struggling to maintain his career. And he basically steals an idea from a plot from one of his students.
Oh my God.
And it's just, as a writer, and and as I was thinking about, okay, I want to start working on my next novel, I just found it so funny and entertaining. And it is, I would characterize it as a thriller because there's some,
Mhm.
some shocking developments later on.
Oh,
um, but then another book that I recently read that I would highly recommend was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo
yes.
by Taylor Jenkins Reid.
Yep.
And what I loved about that book is, it's really about this like aging and reclusive Hollywood movie icon named
Mhm.
Evelyn Hugo.
Yeah.
I've read that it was loosely based on Elizabeth Taylor,
Yeah.
although, yeah, that's never actually stated, but I thought it was a fascinating window into the world of old Hollywood.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I know that you cover a lot of romance novels, and there were some really interesting romance threads throughout the book, as well
Yeah.
as, yeah, historical fiction.
Yeah, I think it was like a really great, engaging world of glamour, all Hollywood, and still figure out this recluse who has married 7 times and to figure out who the love of her life is. And so
Right,
it's like
right.
uncovering the story. And then there's some shocking truths as they uncover from the other person's standpoint. So, yeah.
Exactly. I love that. I feel like that um, really propels a story to kind of wonder, from the very beginning, you're wondering, how is this young writer connected? Like, why
Yeah.
did this Hollywood starlet select her to write this? Like, they
Mhm.
seemingly have no connection at the beginning. So
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. It was definitely a really great great beach read, but at the same time it has some actually like some thought provoking process, you know.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
yeah, and if you were reading Malibu Rising, one of her husbands is the father of the kids. So it's kind of like there's a Taylor Jenkins Reid universe now.
Oh, interesting. I
Yeah,
haven't read that yet, but it's
yeah,
definitely gotten a lot of attention. So I'm
yeah. So that's like a random tidbit. I was like, oh, it's like one of the husbands. You're like, oh, you
That's
know.
interesting.
Yeah. So I love this. Tell us where you can find you online.
So I am on Instagram and Twitter. My handle is at Adele Jam, Jam.
Okay.
And then on Facebook, Adele Myers. And I also have an author site, adelemyersauthor.com.
Thank you, Adele, for being on the show.
Sure, thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share with friends, subscribe, rate, and review the show. This is the easiest way to support the podcast. Today's episode's partner is Libra FM. If you're an audiobook listener, then you should add Libra FM as your go-to source for paid audiobooks. Libra FM makes it possible for you to buy audiobooks through your local bookstore. Memberships start at $14.95, and they also have great sales for women's audiobooks each month for $3.99, thanks to the Kiss Club. To sign up for Libra FM, please visit whattoreadnextblog.com/LibraFM. You will receive a free audiobook when you sign up for a monthly subscription. If you purchase a subscription through our link, you will be supporting the podcast at no cost to you. The What to Read Next podcast is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Please visit frolic.media/podcast to discover new shows to tune in. Thank you so much for listening and have a great day.